This weekend, nearly 50 of the world's major leaders gathered in Munich for the annual security conference. Traditionally, they come to praise the international rules-based order that they claim has kept the peace in Europe since 1945. This year, it seems they came to bury it. On Friday, the host, Germany's Friedrich Merz, told delegates that the international order no longer exists, laying the blame squarely on the Trump White House. Our own Prime Minister yesterday argued that Europe was going to have to stand on its own 2 feet, to quote him. Yesterday, the Americans replied. Secretary of State Marco Rubio basically said, yep, you're right. The conventions and institutions that were supposed to make the rules work are no longer doing the job. For example, according to Rubio, the United Nations blew it in Gaza, failed to prevent Iran building nuclear weapons, and stood idly by while drug dealers took over in Venezuela, leaving America to do all the dirty work. And he said, you lot in Europe, you're allowing your Christian culture to be threatened by mass migration, and you're still not paying your way on defense. We, the United States, he said, can no longer place the so-called global order above the vital interests of our people and our nation. We have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. Well, polite he was not, but imagine what we'd have heard if they'd sent the bad cop. Let's start as ever with the government. Live from Munich, I could speak now to the Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper. Good morning, Foreign Secretary.
Good morning, Trevor.
Can we start with this extraordinary report of the killing of Alexei Navalny? It can't be a surprise that the Kremlin stands accused, but the Russian embassy this morning, I don't know if you know this, is calling your report a nonsense, quote, a mockery of the dead, quote, and describing you and other Western politicians as, quote, feeble-minded fabulists. What's your response?
Well, we have worked for the last 2 years since the announcement of Alexei Navalny's death and the announcement that took place here in Munich 2 years ago. We have worked with our European partners on pursuing the evidence and pursuing the truth. And that is why we have together found the evidence of this lethal toxin that was found in Alexei Navalny's body at the time he died. And only the Russian regime had the motive, the means and the opportunity to administer this lethal poison while he was in prison in Russia. They wanted to silence him because he was a critic of their regime. And that's why we have exposed this barbaric Kremlin plot to do so and made sure that we have done so with evidence as well. And you know, the reason as well that we have done this is it's one of the things that Alexei Navalny himself said, that he said, tell the truth, spread the truth. That is the most dangerous weapon of all. The Russian regime tried to stop him doing so, so we have done so instead.
Do you know from the investigation that's been done whether this was, how can I put this, was this from frog, or in fact it would be hundreds of frogs, wouldn't it? Or was it done in a laboratory?
So I can't tell you the details of that, but as you say, this is a particular chemical. It can be produced synthetically. It can also be found in this particular frog in Ecuador. And we do know that the Russian regime has had possession of this particular chemical. It is obviously not one that is found in naturally in Russia.
On broader matters, the Chancellor German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says that the rules-based international orders collapsed. Marco Rubio, on the other hand, says, don't worry about it. It's all pretty much as it was, as long as you guys pay your way. Who's right?
Well, we're certainly seeing huge global instability that we've not had in previous decades. I think the first significant thing is that the peace dividend we had hoped for after the Cold War, that is completely gone. And we're seeing this Russian aggression as a persistent threat now, not something that's going to go away, that threat to Europe that we have to respond to. We're also seeing the US shift its focus. As we heard from Marco Rubio yesterday, that NATO alliance is still immensely strong and important, and the transatlantic partnership is still very strong and important for our security. However, they are changing their focus, and they are no longer going to be funding the whole of so much of Europe's security as the US did in the past, and that means that Europe has to step up to the plate, and the UK is part of that, and that is exactly what we're doing, because we have to make sure we can protect Britain's national security and do so in partnership with our allies. We're also seeing very big changes across the world more widely, very big economic changes with the rise of China economically, but also much more protectionism, the use of tariffs or economic coercion around export controls on rare earths. So many of these different things that are changing across the world. What I would say in response to that, though, is that things like international law still really matter. Frameworks like the United Nations still really matter, and alliances like NATO still really matter. All of that is going to change. We have to use them differently, but they do remain important, and they're important for our values and our interests. Sorry, Trevor.
No. Rubio talked about the importance of hard power, and from what you've just said, it sounds as though America's hard power is less likely to be placed at the disposal of Europe. And Prime Minister said yesterday, Europe's got to stand on its own 2 feet and so forth. How's that going to happen? Our biggest warship needs American ships to supply it if it's going anywhere. Submarines have to go to the United States to pick up missiles. How quickly do you think we can, or Europe can, effectively reduce its dependency on the United States?
So that transatlantic partnership remains very important, but we have to do more ourselves as well. So one of the things, for example, the UK is doing with Norway is developing a new fleet of joint frigates that can strengthen our maritime security. Particularly, that means recognising the threats from the Russian Northern Fleet that is to the north of Norway and through the Arctic as well. So we're doing that directly with Norway, and we're going to need to go further, strengthening our defence in partnership with other European countries, because that is where some of those threats, particularly from Russia, are most heavily felt. But we've also got to work on things like cyber threats and those hybrid threats that can come from different quarters too.
OK. A couple of quick questions on Russia. Where are we on the unfreezing of Roman Abramovich's assets in London, which you said would be taken to help the Ukrainians buy more weapons?
So the assets, this was from the sale of Chelsea, because we believe that those assets should go to support the people of Ukraine. These particular funds, and we're talking about billions of pounds, were allocated to go for Ukrainian charities to be able to help the Ukrainian people. And we want to see the progress made. Roman Abramovich has had many opportunities to do the right thing, as was agreed at the time of the sale of Chelsea. We have now put forward a new licence process that will require him to do this, and we are ready to take legal action if he doesn't make the shift, transfer that money so that it can be used to support children and people in Ukraine.
You did threaten him with the courts, so pretty much, I think, 6 weeks ago. Shouldn't you just get on with it?
We said that we would give him time to comply. That is following proper process.
He has had 2 or 3 years to comply already.
Yes.
He has had 2 or 3 years.
Made this license,
he can afford it, can't he?
Time to apply. Yes. Yes, he can. He absolutely can, and he should do this, because this is money that he holds from the sale of Chelsea, and we know that this has been a huge benefits as a result of the Russian regime, and we think that money needs to go for the people of Ukraine. He has got this final chance now. The clock is ticking on him. He needs to act, otherwise we will take court action.
The High Court in London this week ruled that your decision to proscribe Palestine Action was disproportionate. What led you to take that decision, other than the spray painting of some military aircraft? This was criminal damage, but it wasn't terrorism, was it?
Well, I followed the clear advice and recommendations, going through a serious process that the Home Office goes through, involving different agencies and police advice as well, which was very clear about the recommendation for proscription of this group. And the court has also concluded that this is not a normal protest group, that it has found that this group has committed acts of terrorism, that this group is not simply in line with democratic values and has promoted violence.
Forgive
as
me
well.
that.
The Home Secretary, let me just finish the point. The Home Secretary has appealed on the grounds on which the government lost. But look, in the end, the decision for a Home Secretary is what you always have to do, is take really seriously advice that you're given. And if you're given advice about potential risks of violence and risks to public safety, you have to take that advice very seriously. This is very different
the High Court,
from issues around protest on Palestine. People still have a legal right, and
you
always
did say.
have had.
You said at the time you'd consulted a wide range of experts. You've just told us that again. The judge this week said that your experts, your evidence was not convincing that this was terrorism. By the way, there are a number of Labour MPs who agree and think that you shouldn't pursue this. What evidence did you actually have that this was terrorism, as opposed to, if you like, the standard criminal damage or inconvenience or other kinds of offences which don't get into the cross the threshold into terrorism?
So I was given significant evidence and advice around risks of violence and risks to public safety, and that is what you take seriously.
They got it wrong then, didn't they?
Home Secretary, and if you ignore advice that you are given about risks to public safety, then you're really not taking seriously the responsibilities of the Home Secretary. That's what you have to do. Now remember,
I'm not inviting
bear in mind that
criticism
this
of
is
you,
going
but
to be appealed. The Home Secretary has appealed.
I'm not inviting criticism of you, but clearly the advice that you were given by the police, by the intelligence services, didn't stack up for, if you like, what the courts call the reasonable person, and certainly the judge is in this case. Do you think that there's something that we need to look at in the way that we, the kind of advice that you and other Home Secretaries get?
Well, the current Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has looked again at this and looked at both the judgment of the court and also the advice that she is being given. And she's been clear that she disagrees with this decision, and that is why the Home Office is appealing. So, look, this is going to go to appeal, so that will mean that there will be another chance for the legal system to consider this. But I really just say, when you're faced with advice around public safety threats, it's really important to take those seriously. And I think you and everybody else would expect Home Secretaries to take very seriously the advice about public safety, the advice about threats to be taken very seriously.
The Prime Minister told other leaders at the Munich conference yesterday, none of whom has a vote in our elections, that they should beware the Greens and the Reform Party. Why was that necessary? What's it to do with them?
Well, the Prime Minister was making a speech broadly yesterday that would obviously be seen more widely. It was reported in the UK. It was also listened to in the hall in the Munich Security Conference by people from all over Europe and across the world. And I think there is a wider issue here that, in the end, our national security depends on us having partnerships abroad, that those make us stronger at home. NATO, the NATO alliance, is really important to that. And we have seen both Reform and the Greens undermine that commitment to the NATO alliance. I think that is hugely important, because I think our national security...
What has Nigel Farage said or done that undermines NATO?
Which they are not doing so.
What has Nigel Farage said or
you're
done that
seeing
undermines NATO?
The reform, we've seen Reform have not taken seriously the threat from Russia. They have refused and failed to do an investigation into Russian interference within their own party, despite the fact that their Welsh leader was convicted of the links, the real serious problems in terms of the links to Russia. They have not taken seriously. They have too often, I think, dismissed the aggression and the threat from Russia, even at a time when we've seen lethal poisons being used once again, just as we saw in Salisbury. So I do take that extremely seriously, and I think it is a problem that Reform don't.
Without revealing my age or vintage here, are you accusing Reform of being a fifth column?
Now, I'm accusing them of not taking this seriously enough. And look, in the end, when you're talking about our national security, it's important, and you can't just, sort of just swan around making comments and saying the easy things and just shooting from the hip. This is really important.
Well, let me give you another.
Our relationships with other countries are important because that is what makes Britain stronger at home.
Let me give you another way in which we might have read what the Prime Minister said yesterday, which is that it was a signal to our allies of how rattled he is that he has to go to Munich to complain about domestic political opponents, Reform and the Greens. And the message to our allies is that this guy's on his way out, and there's no point doing deals with him or with you.
Well, I don't think that's the case at all. And the partnerships that Keir Starmer has built with other leaders, the work that we are doing together is immensely important. And what's what I see here at the Munich Security Conference is the respect towards the UK, towards the Prime Minister for the work that he's done, the leadership he's shown. And that is the fact that the UK has done this work, for example, with our partners on identifying the lethal poison in the case of Alexei Navalny. That is us stepping up and showing we are going to shine the spotlight on Russian aggression. We are not just operating in isolation. We're working with our partners to tackle threats. The work that's being done with Norway on the frigates that I referred to, the work that's being done with the US on strengthening security. Across the board, we work in partnership. That's what makes us stronger at home.
If I may, can I just finally take you to a question, to be honest, which none of us particularly want to ask, and none of you, I don't suppose any of you want to talk about, but we must. The case of Lord Doyle, who it is said campaigned for a man convicted of sexual offences standing in local elections in 2017. Are you now confident that there are no more skeletons in the closet? No one else in your administration campaigned for Sean Morton?
Well, look, I think there's clearly been some significant process failures in this appointment. There is still a review underway on that, but there clearly have been some process failures. We do take this extremely seriously. Keir Starmer has obviously made the importance, talked about the importance of standards in public life, and that's why we take this so seriously. And some of the things we've, I think, obviously had discussions about individual cases. For me, that there is just a wider issue here, which is that I personally, obviously in opposition, made it Labour's mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade, and also in the Home Office made that a central mission for the government. And now in the Foreign Office, I'm making it a priority as part of our foreign policy across the world. And I do think those are the issues we have to take seriously. We have to always be focusing on the voices of victims and survivors, and that should be at the heart of what we do.
And this is, let me be clear, this is not some kind of gotcha question. I think this issue is too serious for that. But what I am hearing is that given the apparent failures in the Mandelson case, now in this Doyle case, you can't say to me that the processes that operate now can assure you completely that this administration, or indeed any other, will be clean of people who associate with people like Sean Morton or Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, what I can say is that we have strengthened the processes. In the appointment of the new ambassador to the US, we did strengthen the processes and to ensure in advance of the appointment, and I take that very seriously. Though, of course, there can always be real concerns about people, about unknown cases where people have committed crimes in different areas. There always has to be a robust response, but you also have to make sure that you've got proper processes in advance as well.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.